The Omicron variant is now the dominant coronavirus strain in parts of the UK. As cases rise in Europe, officials across the continent are reassessing their approach to the pandemic. The World Economic Forum has postponed its annual January meeting in Davos, Switzerland. The event for world leaders and executives is now planned for early summer. Meanwhile, the Netherlands is imposing a full lockdown, and other countries are enforcing stricter mandates. Over the weekend, anti-vaccine demonstrators protested COVID restrictions outside of the UK Parliament. Holly Williams reports.
In London and Belgium over the weekend, thousands protested against COVID restrictions, both turning violent at times. Governments here in Europe know their people are weary and frustrated, just as Omicron rears its head. Less than a month after Omicron was named a so-called variant of concern, it's now the dominant strain in the UK, fueling a surge in cases that dwarfs last winter. A mass mobilisation to get most people aged 18 and over a booster shot by the end of the year is being pushed by England's Dr. Fauci on TV.
There is a new variant of COVID-19, Omicron, which is highly infectious and spreading fast. Every adult in the country needs to get a COVID-19 booster vaccine.
Don't mistake that British reserve for a lack of urgency. Omicron has killed 12 people here so far, but the UK Health Minister is refusing to rule out another lockdown.
There are no guarantees in this pandemic. I don't think at this point we just have to keep everything under review.
Germany and France have now banned most travellers from the UK. And a week before Christmas, the Netherlands has already gone back into lockdown, closing bars, restaurants and non-essential shops. It's unavoidable, said the country's Prime Minister, because of the fifth wave that's coming.
So Holly Williams is joining us now to discuss these restrictions. I tell you, Holly, I'm seeing sort of backlash, emotional backlash in countries that you just don't think of as like hotbeds of protest in Europe, you know, countries where people are pretty compliant when it comes to government regulations. But you are in the UK. People are upset. Can you talk to me a little bit about the challenges that Prime Minister Boris Johnson is facing now, that he's trying to stop the spread of the Omicron variant at a time when people are sort of fed up and want to gather and want to see their friends and loved ones?
Yeah, Anne-Marie, I think it's fair to say that no government in the world right now wants to tell its people who are tired after 2 years of this pandemic that they're going to have to go back into lockdown. So Prime Minister Boris Johnson is dealing with that, just as governments around the world, if they're not already dealing with it, will probably soon be. When it comes to this variant itself, there are many things that we don't know yet about Omicron. There are widely varying models for how it's going to affect things like hospitalizations and the death rate. But one thing that the scientists seem to agree on is that it is highly contagious. In fact, the World Health Organization said recently that the number of Omicron infections is doubling as fast as every 36 hours in places with community transmission. Now, London is one of those places with community transmission. It seems to be the worst hit place here in the UK. In fact, the Mayor of London, Sadiq Khan, declared it a major incident on the weekend. That essentially means that it's an emergency. And the last time that he did that was back in January. He also said that new restrictions are inevitable. Also, the group of scientists in this country that advises the government here on COVID said last week that it is almost certain that there are now hundreds of thousands of new Omicron cases every day. And that is obviously much higher than the official numbers. And they backed up that World Health Organization line about the speed of infection, saying it is now spreading faster in the UK than it was back in March.
Wow. Well, the Netherlands did what you said no government really wants to have to do, which is impose a lockdown there until mid-January. But there are other countries that are dealing with major spikes when it comes to COVID. Denmark, France, Norway. Could we see any of these countries? Are they starting to consider, whether or not a lockdown might be necessary?
I think that's a big maybe. I think those governments clearly don't want to go back into lockdown, but they are bringing in new restrictions that stop short of a full lockdown. So, for instance, in Ireland, they've now put in a curfew, an 8 p.m. Closing time for pubs and restaurants. Germany has banned most travellers from the UK, but even those that go in now have to do quarantine once again. Paris has cancelled some of its New Year's Eve celebrations that would have brought large crowds of people together. And Denmark has closed down a whole range of public venues, everything from cinemas to amusement parks. As you heard in my report just then, the UK Health Minister said he is not ruling out a lockdown, but he knows, as Prime Minister Boris Johnson knows, that a lockdown would be a very unpopular move, including with many members of their own government.
Well, as you know, there are sort of a limited number of tools when it comes to tackling this pandemic. Restricting the way people move and interact with each other, a lockdown, is one possible tool. Here in the U.S., what authorities are really pushing is vaccines. Get yourself vaccinated. If you haven't already, get yourself boosted. If you haven't already, get your kids who are eligible vaccinated. That's where the push lies. I'm wondering what it's like in Europe. I know for a while in the U.K., they were really talking about testing, and they made testing, easily available. But what are the priorities coming that you're hearing from officials in Europe about how to handle this pandemic?
Well, here in the UK, it is very focused indeed, and it is all about this. Let me show you. The backs of all the Sunday papers had the same advertisement. Oh, I'm not holding that very well. On the weekend, this message: get boosted now. Last time we saw Prime Minister Johnson speak, it was written across the podium, across his lectern. It's a very, very clear message. And it's interesting that there's a bad news story right now, which is that the number of infections is rising very quickly. But alongside that, there's a good news story, which is that this country is making monumental efforts to try to make sure that nearly everybody aged 18 and over gets a booster shot before the end of the year. And on Saturday, over 900,000 vaccines were put into people's arms. That is a record in this country, and it is very close to the 1 million figure that they need to be hitting, 1 million doses every day to reach that target they've set for them by the end of the year. So, you see people lining up on the street, lining up for hours. They're really heeding the government's call, and the hope is that by speeding up those boosters, getting them into people's arms, they'll be able to stave off the worst effects of Omicron, whatever they may turn out to be.
Yeah, the concern is that while people are getting boosted, which is fantastic, they're still hanging out with friends and family and going to bars, and they're still sort of mixing and mingling. And so that's why these next few weeks are going to be so crucial when it comes to the spread of this virus. This is the second year the British royal family will be apart during Christmas because of COVID. Any news out of the royal house?
Well, actually, it's not the entire Christmas, or at least that's not for sure. What we know is that last week, the Queen made the decision to cancel the royal family's traditional pre-Christmas lunch. That's for the sort of extended royal family, and it was scheduled to happen tomorrow. She cancelled that for the second year in a row, apparently as a precautionary step. Remember that the Queen is 95 years old. As for what is actually going to happen during the Christmas period, will the Queen and her close family members go to the Sandringham estate, her Sandringham estate? That's where they traditionally go. Will they stay in Windsor, where she's spent most of the pandemic, a lot of that time shielding? At this point, we just don't know.
Yeah. Well, fingers crossed that everyone enjoys their holidays, including you, Holly. Thank you very much.